Welcome to the Harvest Series podcast, recorded here in Kaplankaya on the southwestern Aegean coast of Turkey during Harvest, an event gathering hundreds of curious minds. I could interview the most passionate and inspiring speakers, practitioners, and musicians. I hope you will enjoy this episode. Our guest today is a former White House advisor, economist, entrepreneur, and author of The Leadership Lab, who help us read between the lines of geopolitics, technology, and finance. She brings a unique ability to connect global trends with human intuition and to explain complex ideas in ways that truly make sense. Pippa Malmgrem, welcome to Harvest.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here in Kaplankaya.
It's amazing, beautiful. Thank you.
Where do you travel from?
Well, I was in the Caribbean and I'm on my way to China, so it was kind of halfway.
Great. What's your mission here? What are you going to talk about?
So it's very interesting because I usually speak at events that involve people in finance, people running global businesses, and this festival is much more oriented toward the human experience. And I wanted to take what I know about technology and innovation and put it into the context of the human condition. So I'm going to talk a lot about things like what I call heartware. So we talk about hardware and software, and we're all in the business of making things and making a living, but it's the heart that has to be at the center for many reasons. And we never talk about upgrading our hardware. And so I'm going to talk a bit about why that's important, particularly at this moment in history where we are breaching the frontier of what is known with technology and scientific progress.
You're talking about AI?
Yeah, AI is one good example of it. But it's not only that. It's things like people are very afraid, for example, of artificial intelligence. They're all certain they're all going to lose their jobs and there'll be nothing to do. And I see something quite the opposite, which is we should be thinking of satellites and subsea cables and artificial intelligence and computer chips as human prosthetics. They literally are ways of expanding our reach. So the James Webb Telescope, which is 1.5 million miles away, allows me to see deep into the universe. And similarly, there's something called the Titan Krios it's a magnascope, lets you see very, very small things. And so I can see now deep into even the subatomic structure of reality. And we're in a race in the world of geopolitics, the race for space and the race for subspace. And as we enter these unknown regions, we begin to learn things that are different from what we thought before. And that process is also scary to people. Wait, I thought that I understood, people say there's no water on the moon. Turns out there is. And there are many things we're going to find out that we didn't know before. So the thing is how to get people more comfortable with all that and feel empowered by all this. And that actually we're heading towards, in my opinion, abundance. And so it's not that you won't have a job. It's that you will be able to do the work that you are uniquely designed through your own heartware to do.
Wouldn't you say that energy, in a way, is at the heart of all the conflicts, and for most of them, in the end, sometimes you also have a religion's territory, but deep inside, it's always linked to energy, in a way. You say we're going to have abundance of energy. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, for example, a lot of work is being done right now on space-based solar power. The Chinese are building a massive space-based solar facility. So imagine you have an extremely large satellite base in space. It takes the sun's rays, converts them to radio waves, beams them to any power grid anywhere on Earth, and now you have clean, green energy. Now, in the West, we're also developing this. Airbus has pioneered this technology, Caltech also in the United States. And so that's being pursued. The question is, how far away are we? And I think the answer is not as far as you might think. So that's one form. Another is we're improving our technology around, for example, oil refining and oil extraction, so that you can do that process with less toxicity, but also more efficiency and more efficient motors. I mean, we have so many people working on alternative forms of power for motors, hydrogen fuel cells, all these things are underway. If you add to the supercomputing, basically supercomputing and the new caliber of computer chips is collapsing the amount of time you need to innovate. So for example, Google has a new chip called the Willow chip. And Google has said that they gave this chip a problem that previously, theoretically, took 10 septillion years for all the computers on Earth to solve. Now, no one knows what does 10 septillion years mean, right?
Okay.
Apparently, it is longer than the known history of the universe. Can't solve this problem. The Willow chip solves the problem in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Now, let's allow for some hyperbole and a little exaggeration, but fundamentally, we are collapsing the amount of time required to solve problems. And that problem-solving collapse means we get to answers on a speed scale that we've never imagined before. So take any problem, energy. How fast will we fix these problems? Much faster.
This is very interesting, and I can't stop to relate what you're saying to Satish Kumar yesterday we had, who's proning like a very simple life, and so this is really two opposite ways in a way, like to go full on technology and trust the technology, and we're gonna have more, but anyway we're gonna produce more, and we're never gonna lack, and the other way of a more traditional life, pure life, and we need just to create with our hands and get the fruits and have a simple life. What do you think about this, Pippa?
Well, I think you can absolutely do both at the same time. We can have extraordinary advances occurring in science and technology and at the same time lead simpler lives. So that means you can solve energy problems, address cancer, but meanwhile, the individual human is being more and more human, less and less tech. And maybe that is the solution. Another piece of that puzzle is, what do we think we're here for? I think this fundamental question on what is the purpose of being a human? What is the human condition? And we've locked ourselves into the left side of the brain, the scientific, rational, logical part of our mind. I call it left brain lock. And we get stuck in there thinking that our value comes from our capacity to analyze, to solve problems. But maybe what's happening is these prosthetics we're being given, these chips and these supercomputer networks that we're now connected to, whether we realize it or not. That is meaning our left side of the brain is so enhanced that we don't need to put all our energy into that. We can shift to the right side. The right side, and I'm being slightly exaggerating, the brain experts will say that both sides do both things. But broadly speaking, if we say the right side's the creative side, the part that has emotion and empathy and it cares about connection with other humans, we can begin to devote much more of our energy to that. And the thing that allows you to connect the left and the right, the rational and the sort of mystical side of what it is to be human, I think is our heart space. And again, how much time and energy do we devote to that? In the modern world economy, we basically say, anything you're going to do that's just for the love of it, the hobbies, the love affairs, the things you do just because your soul needs to do it, we do that in our spare time. We love in our spare time. We are busy trying to get ahead, right, with the work. And actually, maybe we don't have to do that. Maybe the work is becoming so much easier because of all these advancements that we can now really shift our energy into the heart space. And what does it mean to be human? So I think you can do both absolutely at the same time.
You were talking about these amazing technological discoveries and the future that could be waiting for us full of energy, not lacking of energy. We still have a competition between the US,
Yes.
China, and some countries a bit left out of the game. So what is it going to, are we going to share energy, or what's going to happen for you?
Well, this is a really great question. For example, we'd go back to space-based solar power. We're in a massive space race, particularly between the US and China. And that race is not well understood by the public. You know, people are like, are these just billionaires who are joyriding in space? You know, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos,
Yeah.
you know, Elon Musk. Like, don't we have enough problems here on Earth? And the answer is it's about solving all the problems on Earth. So if we take just space-based solar power as a concept, then what happens when you achieve truly ubiquitous, abundant energy that's clean and green and accessible anywhere, anytime? Are we really going, is whoever gets there first really going to say it's mine, all mine, nobody else's? I call this the Gollum approach from J.R.R. Tolkien's novels, right? It's mine, my precious, I get to keep it. No, if it's totally abundant and ubiquitous, the only option is we're all going to be sharing it. I mean, what's the point of having a fight over something that's truly abundant? The same with new methods of food production. I think that we're going to come into an era where people already care much more about the quality of the food they're eating. They're not content to accept mass industrialized farming techniques anymore. Can we do this at scale, locally, globally? I think the answer is going to be yes. So then what are you fighting over? There's nothing to fight over. So I just wonder, the shift from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking is so huge. Most people are like, oh, well, that would be great. But they haven't thought through what are the implications. For example, in economics, we assume that prices are determined by scarcity, right? What is the price of bread? It depends how many loaves of bread are there. But how do you price things if everything is abundant? It will literally destroy our concept of how economies work and force us to innovate the actual paradigm for what is economics. So these are dramatic, vast changes on our landscape, but all in a positive direction, I think.
You mentioned that you were advising President George W. Bush. What I know that's a frequent question you get.
Yeah.
But what's your experience for that? What are the lessons? And could you do that again after having left this part of your life, this chapter?
Yeah.
Would that be something that you would do differently and you would enjoy to do now?
First of all, this is an incredibly hard job. You are... I keep saying a medical school needs to do a study of what happens to White House presidential staff because you are crushed.
Yeah.
You would never allow a pilot to fly a plane on so little sleep, but you allow them to choose the future pathway of the country on almost no sleep. The pressures are so incredible. I was there when we had 9/11 and 7 of the 9 largest bankruptcies in American history in a single year. That was Enron, Tyco, WorldCom.
Oh my God,
so,
wow.
I mean, it's just crushing and so consequential, right? So you can't afford to make mistakes. So now it's interesting when people say we have an emergency. I'm like, really? Let's see. How big of an emergency is it? Like, you know.
Like the sound check.
My definition of an emergency has changed. So I greatly benefited from that. It's like steel, you know, when you temper steel and a lot of heat, and then you drop it and plunge it in cold water and then a lot of heat. It's that kind of environment. So very difficult. But honestly, I think, look, it doesn't matter what moment of history you serve the leader of a superpower. There are always these immense pressures. I think right now is a particularly tricky time. We have been close to the possibility of a World War III. I personally argued several years ago that we're already in it. We just don't recognize that we're in it. And a lot of the
for you, we are in a third world war.
Yeah, but the way I've described it is we're in a hot war in cold places and a cold war in hot places.
Okay.
The cold places are space, the high north and the Arctic, the high seas above and below the surface of the seas. Now, all of those locations, there are no journalists. And they're all highly classified. So are there events occurring?
Wow.
Yeah, that, every once in a while you hear about a satellite incident, but it's not really explained. But do I think that we have been having space-based conflict between the superpowers? Yeah, I do. Same thing with naval spaces. The Arctic, nobody pays attention because they're like, who cares? But they don't understand. The satellites connect to Earth at the Arctic. And so there's a reason all the NATO ships are in Svalbard, part of Norway, inside the Arctic, because they're protecting the umbilical cord of communications for Earth. And there have been targeted attacks on those subsea cables. I mean, we've been in subsea cable warfare now for several years. And again, it's the superpowers that are, that they have different excuses. They say, oh, I didn't realize that one of our ships was dragging the anchor on the subsea cable. Oh, pardon me, I didn't realize. And you're like, yeah, okay. It is a kind of warfare,
okay.
And to finish the Cold War in hot places, there have been clear conflict between, for example, the United States and Russia across North Africa. That's a lot of the Sahel conflicts have the two superpowers really behind that. Also, we see the United States and China jockeying for physical footholds and influence across Pacific Islands. And people are like, well, who cares about Pacific Islands? The answer is, well, they're critically important if naval superiority is your goal. So these are all elements of World War III. But my belief is that we've moved so far forward in that conflict that the superpowers have realized that if they keep going, we're going to end up in a proper nuclear threat environment. We are already really there because the Russians have threatened to use nuclear weapons. Once you reach that point, basically, it's all over. So I think the human response is kicking in, which is, let's talk. Let's find another way. And so I'm very optimistic that it's weird. Just as the general public is realizing, oh my gosh, we might be in World War III. I'm like, yeah, I think that it's ending actually now.
Yeah. Do you think that we needed to get so close to stop it? Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. That's a really interesting question. The question I've asked myself for a long time, because I'm involved in the strategic security community. I lecture to the NATO generals from time to time. The thing is, can you really spend a record amount of money on defense equipment and not use it? That's the question. And we have spent a fortune on defense equipment in the last decade. It's so much more sophisticated. It's so much more powerful. So my question was always, can we really build all that stuff and not use it? And I think the temptation to use it becomes quite overwhelming. But the threat that we end up in a conflict that decimates Earth is so clear that I really do think our leaders, again, not just political leaders, our religious leaders as well, are all stepping in to say, no, let's not do this. Let's not do this.
If you could have whispered something at the ear of the President W. Bush at the time, and he would really listen to you, one thing, and if you could whisper something at the ear of President Trump today, what would it be?
Oh, it's a super interesting question. We have this very strange problem in the U.S., which is often referred to as the deep state. And it's this idea that you have the executive branch, the presidency, and the Congress, and then you have not just a bureaucracy that think they know better, you also have a kind of military industrial complex who fight against whoever the president is, and often don't tell the president the truth.
Okay.
So the briefings that you get, this is what happened to Kennedy and Nixon, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, who my father was an advisor to. They were all told by the generals, we're winning in Vietnam, we're winning in Vietnam, when we knew we were losing in Vietnam. But they wanted the war to continue because they had their own agenda, their own understanding of why it was important to defeat communism. And Kennedy in particular doubted the situation. Nixon doubted and said, are we really winning? And tried to find their own answers. And that brought them into conflict with this sort of what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Today, it's very interesting because Trump, of course, he raises emotions, like one word out of his mouth, and he just gets everyone's emotional state all riled up, right? And people globally, there's just a lot of hate for him for many, many reasons. But it's interesting that he has emerged as the peace guy. He's the guy saying, let's not do war. And weirdly, the Democrats in the US have emerged as the pro-war party. And the military-industrial complex, deep state, whatever you want to call it, they like wars to continue. And we could get into the reasons why. But it's very strange. So we kind of, those two presidents you mentioned, both keep being told by that community, we must go to war. It's really important. In George W. Bush's case, we did. And I think now, obviously, we know a lot more about what was the truth. And there's regret. And there's a sense of, wait, how did we make decisions so poorly? I think Trump is also feeling, I'm trying to get to peace, and I've got constant opposition from people that want the war. Why is this happening? So strangely, those two presidents are facing similar situations. I think Trump is more likely to win that argument and get to peace. And part of the way he's doing it is he's not even trying to negotiate with those Americans. He's going to the foreign leaders. And that's how Saudi has emerged as an important intermediary in that peace process, and the Emirates. He's going directly to the Chinese. He's going directly to Putin and saying, do we really want to have a fight? Let's cut a deal. Let's find a way. And that is being opposed by a lot of forces in the US. So we have a strange situation.
What's your analysis? Thanks for sharing so many interesting things. And we know that in the US, the president don't always have the full powers.
Yes.
What's your view on the tariffs? What happened?
It's so interesting and complex. So just for background, my dad negotiated most of the trade deals from the mid-1960s through the mid-1970s, launched the Tokyo round of trade negotiations. I did my PhD on trade policy. So my whole family, we've been deep in this, in tariffs for our long time, for a long time. So Trump comes out and he never presents anything in a nice way, right? He's a typical New York City property guy, right? So he walks in the room and he goes, you're going to pay me $50 million for my building and you're going to be grateful for it. And you're like, I'm not paying you $50 million for your building. Your building's worth 20. And then he goes, well, and then you start negotiate, right? And you end up at a number where he pays 20. And Trump walks out of the room going, I thought it was only worth 10. Right? You know, this is a property developer. That's how they play, right? Mm-hmm. So he's bringing this mentality to this subject. Personally, I think we have to separate our emotional response to Trump from our analytical capacity to understand what's the offer. And I've been trying to describe it as, imagine if you were given a beautiful gift wrapped in sandpaper. Would you throw it away because of the sandpaper wrapping? No. We have to open it up and say, what does it mean? So, for example, when he says to these other countries, your tariffs are super high, and ours are much lower, so we're just going to raise ours to your level. See how you like that. And then they immediately go, oh my God, we can't live with that. So, for example, Vietnam was the first country. They said, okay, we're going to zero. Trump says, great, we're going to zero. Now we had a free trade deal with Vietnam. My father, as a negotiator, couldn't have dreamed of getting a zero tariff free trade deal. That's like, it was impossible to achieve. And suddenly it was achieved in a matter of days. Now, Were the tactics totally brutal? Yes. Is that unpleasant? Absolutely. But is it getting you to where you want to be? Yeah. Now, once you got free trade deal with Vietnam, that puts a lot of pressure on all the other Asian countries because all the business is going to move to Vietnam otherwise. So it forces everybody to negotiate the numbers down. I'd add one more thing to this, which is really crucial. It is an invitation. I know it doesn't look like an invitation, doesn't sound like an invitation. It sounds like a baseball bat to your head. But it's an invitation to the businesses in China to come to the US and make things here. Now, everybody goes, well, that's impossible. But it's not. One company called Haier, H-A-I-E-R, that makes refrigerators. Haier in 1999 realized that they wanted to manufacture in the US. When everyone else was moving refrigerator production to China, they moved to South Carolina. And why? Because the chief executive said, look, the American consumers, the most discerning, the most difficult, the highest demands, we need to be close to them so we understand them. Because if we can serve them, we can serve anybody. And he's famous for having brought the concept of quality control into Chinese manufacturing, which never existed before. He smashed 72 or 73 refrigerators because they had a little scratch on them. And everybody went, oh my God, they're really serious about quality control. Let's just say their sales of fridges boomed in the US. They ended up buying General Electric's home appliance division for $5.5 billion, which they still run. Chinese companies are perfectly capable of becoming global players. And frankly, if China wants to raise national incomes, they need more global brands. So that would also integrate the Chinese economy into the world economy more deeply. And the Chinese workers would stop being ripped off by American companies who basically move the jobs to China, pay the Chinese worker nothing, charge the American consumers a fortune, and they just keep the difference. So this is an attack more on American corporates than it is on China. And interestingly, if you go to Instagram, now you have all these Chinese artisans who've been making all the, I won't mention which specific luxury goods brand's name, but we know all the luxury good brands, right? They're all being made by these Chinese workers. They're on Instagram going, I make these. And by the way, I have my own design ideas. And if you want me to make stuff for you, call me on this number. And the young Americans are like, I'd like to work with these guys. These are cool. I don't want to pay some luxury goods company a fortune for something that doesn't cost that much. And this is more fun. Who are these guys? So suddenly, actually, the small businesses of China are getting a big leg up. So I know Trump is easy to hate. I know you have to assume that everything he does must be bad. But if we can separate our emotion from our analysis, actually, I do think this might be an incredible gift in a sandpaper wrapping.
Beautifully said, Pippa. I could go on forever with you and take you, but you have this absolute emergency of a sound check.
Yes, for my speech today. Yeah.
But I still want to know more about your journey because you mentioned a bit your father, but what led you to be this lady who knows everything about geopolitics and advise the president, and where you are today, write books, and be really, really recognized for what you do. What's your journey?
Well, thank you. You know, I think the main thing is I was so very lucky because I didn't know, as a child, you don't know what your parents do professionally, or it's just your dad. But now I look back and I realize that my dad was advising so many presidents, and he was teaching me from a very early age how to think as if you are in the Oval Office with the president, where you can't say, oh, I'm a Japan expert, so I can only answer questions on Japan. No, we have huge problems that are deeply intertwined with many different silos of expertise, and you need to come up with an answer and fast. So he taught me how to connect the dots between seemingly unrelated things. Also very much about the human condition. He used to say, there's the front page of the Washington Post story, and then there's what actually happened. And what actually happened is often something you can't imagine, like the wives of the senators didn't get along, and that's why the legislation didn't pass. You're like, really? Yeah, we're humans, right? So part of it was my dad teaching me a way of thinking. Part of it, my mom was extraordinary, had an extraordinary mind. And she ended up learning Middle English, Chaucerian English, Shakespearean English, and ended up at Oxford and became very close with J.R.R. Tolkien and nearly married his son, Christopher. And so she taught me a huge amount about storytelling. And storytelling is, particularly in economics, is so important. People think economics is all about numbers, but actually nobody really understands numbers. It's the stories that matter. So I suspect that part of the reason I've had the career I've had is the combining of these two ways of thinking. Yeah.
One thing also, because you're a woman in, we could say quite men's world, talking about the drones, electricity, space, technology. You're still talking about the heart. Like, I mean, you're not in a suit. It doesn't seem like you took your suit and talking men's language. So how do you bring this heart language in men's discussions?
It's super interesting. So I did find myself in a suit for a very long time. I noticed, I look at my pictures from when I was an investment banker, when I was in the White House, I'm always in a navy blue suit with a white shirt, low heels, and I realized, oh my gosh, I was basically, in a sense, being a guy, because that was the way you could fit in and have a seat at the table. And it took me a long time to really register that I personally, and as a feminine being, had a different angle to bring to the table and a different way of speaking. It vastly accelerated in my later years, I would say from about 40 years old onward. Okay. So it took me a long time. I also think I had a lot of armor, by which I mean it became very hard to argue with me because, I had a PhD and I'd worked for the president and I'd run strategy for big investment banks. Like, when you have that much armor on, it's very difficult for people to really challenge you. And that meant I was free to then begin speaking about things people don't normally speak about. And that is like this idea of your heart space and your heartware. And now that I do it, and I do it so much more freely, it's fascinating the reaction I get, whether I'm in boardrooms or I'm working with live audiences. And often it's the young men who come up and they say, I'm so grateful for you bringing this perspective. We need more of this, because they too feel that the usual approach is, it's very ego driven. It's very, we have to win and the other side has to lose. And I'm like, why can't we all have win-win solutions? I think I learned that from my dad too. He said every trade negotiation always had to be win-win. Nobody could go back to their government and say, our country loses. There's no way you can have that happen. Yeah. Everyone has to have a winning position. This is game theory. So why are we talking about it as if it's a sport? This isn't a sport. But that mentality tends to dominate. And this immense focus on we have to get rich, right? That money is the ultimate definer of human happiness. Well, we know that actually this is just not true. And we have this whole class of people who have had the massive financial success who then all seem to have big breakdowns because it doesn't buy you happiness. So can we talk about this, And that's what I was trying to do with my co-author in these 2 books I wrote on leadership. How do we introduce a style of leadership that's less, we have to have this level of sales and we have to beat the competition and the share price has to go up, and more focus on how we're running a community of employees, of shareholders, of stakeholders. How do we create win-win solutions for everyone involved in that whole ecosystem of capitalism? And the answer is you can. Many companies do. And they become very famous for it. Patagonia is one of them. Chobani yogurt, right? Very interesting. The founder of that company said, we're going to make great yogurt because yogurt in America is terrible, which it was at the time. And he brought basically Turkish, Greek-style yogurt to Americans. But he said, we're going to make a company where we employ refugees, because he had been one himself, and created this incredible community of high achievers that had had rough life experiences. And people bought into that as a concept, not just the yogurt, but what does it stand for? I think Patagonia is very similar, and they just gave away all the shares into a trust to preserve nature, for example.
Beautiful. Right.
Beautiful. So there are ways to do this.
Dr. Pippa Malmgrem, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and explaining in very simple ways your view, complex things. So thank you so much, and I'll be listening to your talk a bit later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Harvest Series podcast recorded in Kaplankaya. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to have some more.